The maintenance tunnel smelled like burnt copper and recycled air. Grace Sullivan didn't notice. She'd been breathing station air for 11 months straight, and her nose had long since surrendered the war against recycled oxygen. What she did notice, because Grace noticed everything, was the sound of footsteps behind her. 3 sets. Heavy. Not the magnetic clunk of station crew boots. Something with claws. She kept walking. The tunnel was a gray artery running beneath Deck 7 of Orbital Station Meridian, a commercial hub where 47 species negotiated cargo contracts and tried not to insult each other's digestive habits. Grace worked maintenance. Specifically, she worked environmental maintenance, the unglamorous, essential business of keeping 47 species alive in a metal box floating in the void. She was good at it. She was also, at this particular moment, very aware that she was being followed. The 3 Vorkai had picked her up near the cargo bay. She'd clocked them the moment they fell into step, tall, reptilian, with scales that shifted from green to slate gray in low light. Vorkai were mercenary by nature and opportunistic by culture. The station logs had flagged 2 missing cargo manifests this week. Grace had a very good idea who'd taken them, and an equally good idea that they now wanted to ensure she couldn't file a report. She reached the junction she'd been aiming for. Casually, very casually, she pressed her palm against the maintenance panel beside the door and stepped through into secondary tunnel C. The Vorkai followed. The door sealed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid dropping into place. In the monitoring hub 3 decks up, Adrian Brooks looked up from his console. He was a compact man, mid-30s, with the particular stillness of someone who'd spent years in confined spaces learning not to fidget. His official title was Systems Safety Coordinator, which was a generous description of a job that mostly involved watching camera feeds and waiting for things to go catastrophically wrong. The alert on his screen was quiet. Just a small amber icon. Maintenance door C7. Manual override engaged. Authorization, Sullivan, G. He leaned forward. The camera feed from secondary tunnel C was already pulling up. 3 Vorkai, 1 human woman. The math was not favorable. Vorkai averaged 2.3 meters and 200 kilograms. Grace Sullivan was 1.7 meters and looked like she could be knocked over by a strongly worded memo. Adrian's hand moved to the intercom. Then he stopped. Grace hadn't triggered an emergency signal. She'd triggered a maintenance override, which meant either she was panicking and hit the wrong button, or she'd done exactly what she intended to do. He sat back, pulled up the tunnel schematics, started reading. The tunnel went quiet in the way that only sealed spaces could, a deep, pressurized silence where every breath became audible. The lead Vorkai spoke in trade pidgin, its translator collar flickering blue. You filed a maintenance request this morning. Cargo Bay 9. We know what you saw. Grace set her toolkit down on the floor. Slowly, like she had all the time in the world. I file a lot of maintenance requests. You're going to have to be specific. The manifest discrepancy. The second Vorkai moved to her left. The third drifted right. Classic flanking. They were practiced at this. You will withdraw the report. Grace looked at the lead Vorkai for a long moment. Then she looked up at the ceiling. The Vorkai followed her gaze, confused. There was nothing there but pipes, junction conduits, and 3 environmental regulators spaced at 4-meter intervals, large, cylindrical units that managed atmospheric mix in the tunnel. Those regulators, Grace said conversationally, are on the Deck 7 isolation loop, which means they're on my maintenance schedule. She tilted her head. Do you know what the atmospheric blend is in this tunnel right now? Silence. 21% oxygen, 78 nitrogen, 1% trace gases. Standard human comfortable mix. She picked up her toolkit again, unzipped it without looking down. Vorkai respiratory systems run optimally at 18% oxygen. Below 14, you experience what the medical database calls acute cognitive impairment. She paused. I call it not being able to think straight. The lead Vorkai's translator collar flickered. You cannot. I already did. Grace's hand came out of the toolkit, holding a small atmospheric injector, the kind used to test environmental calibration. I ran this tunnel through an emergency recycle when I sealed the door. Takes about 4 minutes to fully cycle. She glanced at her wrist unit. We're at 2 minutes 40. The lead Vorkai took a step forward. I wouldn't, Grace said. Not a threat. Just information, delivered in the same tone she used to read pressure gauges. You're already slowing down. You just haven't noticed yet. It was true. The lead Vorkai had stopped mid-step. Its eyes, large, amber, vertical-pupilled, were tracking slower than they had 30 seconds ago. The flanking pair stood still, a half-second behind where their instincts should have put them. The doors, the lead Vorkai said. Its voice had gone slightly rough. You are also trapped. Humans evolved at altitude, Grace said. Tibetan Plateau, Andean Highlands. We've got hemoglobin that flexes. I can function fine down to 11%. She shrugged. I've worked low-atmosphere environments for 6 years. My body thinks this is Tuesday. The third Vorkai sat down. Not intentionally. Its legs simply made the decision without consulting the rest of it. 3 decks up, Adrian watched the camera feed with an expression that had migrated slowly from concern to something approaching professional admiration. He had the tunnel schematics open, the atmospheric logs running beside them, and he'd already pulled the maintenance record that showed Grace had filed a calibration request for secondary tunnel C at 0600 that morning, 6 hours before she'd walked into it. She'd planned this. He keyed his intercom to the station security office. This is Brooks in Systems Safety. I need a medical response team and 2 security officers at secondary tunnel C, deck 7 access point. Non-emergency pace. The situation is under control. He paused. Tell them to bring oxygen supplementers. Vorkai configuration. He looked at the feed again. Grace was sitting on her toolkit, watching the 3 large aliens gradually lower themselves to the floor like very slow, very confused landslides. She hadn't raised her voice once. When the doors unsealed 11 minutes later, Grace stood up, collected her toolkit, and stepped over the lead Vorkai's outstretched leg. Adrian was standing in the corridor with the security team. He looked at her. She looked at him. You were watching, she said. From about 30 seconds after the door sealed. He fell into step beside her as the medics moved past them into the tunnel. When did you plan it? Yesterday, when I found the first manifest. She zipped her toolkit closed as they walked. I knew they'd come for me. The tunnel was the only place on the station where I controlled the environment, and they didn't. You lured them into your workspace. I lured them into my workspace, she agreed, with a slight emphasis that made the distinction clear. Adrian was quiet for a moment. What if they'd moved faster? Before the cycle completed? Grace glanced at him sideways. I had a secondary option. He waited. She patted the toolkit. He decided not to ask what was in it. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, boots echoing in the metal corridor. You know, Adrian said, there are regulations about deliberately altering atmospheric conditions to incapacitate station personnel. They're not personnel. They're cargo thieves. Still, I also fixed the pressure regulator injunction for while I was in there. The one that's been cycling wrong for 3 weeks. She looked at him. I filed the paperwork at 0600. Adrian thought about this. So technically, you were just doing scheduled maintenance. And some uninvited guests wandered into a work zone with an active atmospheric calibration in progress. Grace shrugged. Safety hazard, really. Someone should have put up a sign. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. Brooks, she said, reading his expression, those 3 were going to make sure I couldn't report what I found. You know what they were going to do. He did know. He'd worked stations for 9 years. He knew what make sure meant in a sealed corridor with no witnesses. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. She started walking again. He matched her pace. I'm going to need your statement for the security file, he said. I'll give you the long version, she said. Over coffee. If this station has anything that qualifies. Cargo Bay 3 has a vendor. Species 47 makes something that's technically coffee if you don't read the ingredient list. Perfect, Grace said. I've been breathing recycled air for 11 months. My standards have adjusted. Adrian smiled. Just slightly, just for a second. The kind of smile that meant I think I understand this person and I'm glad she's on our side in equal measure. Behind them, in secondary tunnel C, 3 very large, very humbled Vorkai were being helped to their feet by medics and explaining, in increasingly incoherent trade pidgin, what had happened. None of them had a satisfying answer. The human lady had walked in ahead of them, set her toolkit down, and won before any of them had understood they were in a fight. That, the station logs would later record, was the last reported incident of cargo theft on Deck 7. The maintenance department's incident report listed the cause as atmospheric calibration in progress. Unauthorized personnel entered restricted zone. Grace Sullivan's name appeared nowhere in the security file. Adrian Brooks made sure of that.